There was something that made me. There was something that wanted me to go into the room, but I guess we're in the room, so we're fine. Perfect.
Do I need to type?
No, you're good. Okay, well, only 1 minute passed despite all that. Bailiff?
People of the audience, the jury, please note that these proceedings contain spoilers for the first 5 books of The Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. So if you haven't read them, get out. Now, all rise for the Honourable Verin Mathwin, esteemed sister of the Brown Aja.
Please be seated. This is a special tribunal set up by the Hall to adjudicate the actions of the Aiel in response to the event known as Layman's Sin. As a neutral party and representative of the White Tower, I will preside over these proceedings. The prosecutors representing the people of the Westlands are Gus from the Wheel of Time Takes with Allie and Gus, and Jenny, aka Lesby Nerdy. The prosecutors representing the people, the defense attorneys representing the people of the dragon are Roof Mistress Leia and Critter XD. In the case of the people of the Westlands versus the people of the dragon, the charges are as follows. Genocide. Order, please. Genocide for which the elements are killing members of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group with the intent to destroy in whole or in part that group. Note, the target of destruction must be the group as such, not its members as individuals. The second charge, first-degree murder, which is the intentional killing of another person by someone who has acted willfully, deliberately, or with planning, and trespassing, which is the knowing entry on the land of another. The parties will first give opening remarks. Prosecution, you may proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor. Peoples of the jury, fellow counsels, honored Verin Sedai, we are here today to discuss a very simple thing. Should the Aiel, the people of the dragon, as they call themselves, be held responsible for the stabby slaughter that they propagated against not just the one man, King Layman, but the whole peoples of the Westlands? The charges before us are quite simple, as you heard them. First-degree murder, genocide, trespassing. Trespassing's pretty easy. I ask you all to remember, as we enter into this trial, that King Layman is not on trial today. King Layman did not receive a trial. King Layman was subjected to summary execution with no trial. Over the course of these proceedings, we will lay out for you quite clearly how the Aiel, as a group, decided to enforce their beliefs, their lifestyle on other peoples, held other nations responsible for the actions of a single man, and crossed borders that they shouldn't have, which is what trespassing is. The concepts of kingship will be discussed, the nature of gift giving, and whether or not it's okay to say that, hey, you guys over there have to live the lifestyle that I want, and you guys can't do this thing because we said it's not okay. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. And now the defense.
It's all bullshit.
It's quite simple. Had the Aiel marched across the Dragon Wall to murder Laman, murder Carianans unprovoked, we wouldn't be here because we would agree that that was wrong. My phone flipped. Instead, every action they took was in response to an act of war by Laman and, by extension, Carian, the country itself. The Chora tree was a sacred tree that represented the treaty between the Aiel and the Carianans in response to the Carianan giving them water long ago. By taking that tree down, disrespecting the relationship between the Aiel and the Carianan, and destroying, frankly, one of the last probably 2 relics of that kind from the Age of Legends, Laman was asking for it. Not to mention the fact that the destruction of the tree suggested an intent on Laman, who was a hot-headed warmonger, to come for the Aiel. A reasonable response from the Aiel was to come back for him and do what it took to get him and mete out justice, appropriate justice. So while we are not contending that the Aiel killed him, because they absolutely did, because he absolutely deserved it, we are contending that what the Aiel did was just.
Thank you, counsel. The prosecution may proceed with its case in chief.
Thank you, Baron Sedai. The Aiel have attempted to justify the premeditated murder of King Laman, claiming that this act of vigilante justice, this murder, was warranted due to his desecration of the sacred tree. However, it is a well-documented fact that the Aiel presented the tree as a gift to the nation of Carian, an act of recompense, a return for the gift of water that the nation of Carian gave the Aiel at the time of wandering that followed the breaking. A gift, by its very nature, signifies a transfer of ownership and implies that the giver relinquishes all claims and control over the item bestowed. Therefore, once the Aiel gifted the tree to Carian, they no longer retained the right to dictate how it should be treated or preserved. Furthermore, it is essential to recognize that being displeased with the actions of the recipient of a gift speaks more to the character of the giver than the receiver. If the Aiel, as the gift givers, expressed their dissatisfaction or disappointment with how the Carianan handled the tree, it reflects on their own misguided expectations or an inflated sense of entitlement. It is not the prerogative of the giver to impose their values or expectations upon the recipient once a gift has been freely given. If I were to present to you, say, a gift of $100, and you were to take that $100 and use it to purchase a limited edition signed copy of The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump, would I then be justified in coming into your home, destroying all you own, and murdering you? No. Despite how offensive I may find your use of my gift, it was in fact a gift. You would be free to do with it as you will. From a legal perspective, this argument challenges the notion that the Aiel were justified in their actions during the Aiel War due to Carian's treatment of the gifted tree. The Aiel's continued attachment to the fate of the tree and their subsequent retribution against Carianan suggest a lack of understanding and acceptance of the basic principles of gift giving.
To continue upon this point, the action, as stated by the honored Baron Sedai, is considered Laman's sin. Who are the Aiel to dictate what is and is not a sin? Something you do may be sinful to me. It is not my place to tell you so or to do anything about it. Is it upon the Illianers to persecute the Tyrans for their actions? Is it upon the Andorans to persecute the Kyrianan for their weird hairstyles?
So
That would be considered unlawful and an act of war, and frankly, a dick move. It's not in question that what Layman did was, as has been stated, a dick move. But a dick move done in his territory, with his people, with his property. On the subject of territory, the Aiel have a clear conception of territory. What happens to wetlanders who go into the Aiel Waste, except if you're one of a few special protected classes?
They are murdered.
Yes. Implying, therefore, that there is a boundary between the wetlands, as they so kindly call them, and the Aiel Waste. Thus,
I object.
Objection overruled.
thus, responding to an act of a single man with thousands of spears must be trespassing. On the subject of that single man, I return to my co-counsel for a discussion on kingship.
We contend that the Aiel's understanding of kingship contradicts the notion of holding the entire population of Cairhien responsible for the actions of their king. Additionally, this understanding raises questions about the Aiel's adherence to their own code of honor when engaging in conflicts with individuals who, according to their apparent beliefs, had no choice but to fight. Throughout the story, the Aiel make it clear that they do not perceive the Car'a'carn as a king. When Rand attempts to enforce his will, the Aiel explicitly state that the Car'a'carn is not a king, in order to highlight the differences between the king and the Car'a'carn, that the Aiel are not obligated to blindly follow their rulers. Conversely, the statement that the Car'a'carn is not a king reveals their belief that a king possesses absolute power and authority over his people. If the Aiel genuinely hold this belief, then there is no basis for holding the entirety of the Cairhienin accountable for the actions of their king. According to the Aiel's own understanding, the people have no significant power or influence over the decisions and actions of their ruler. Therefore, it would be inconsistent to attribute the collective responsibility to the Cairhienin people by the Aiel's own reasoning. They lack the agency and power to affect and control the actions of their king. Furthermore, if we accept the Aiel's understanding of the relationship between a king and their subjects, it follows that anyone fighting against the Aiel during the war would have had no choice but to engage in that battle. According to this perception of a king's authority, individuals are obliged to obey their rulers without question. This raises concerns, again, about the Aiel's adherence to their own code of honor when engaging in combat with individuals who had no alternative but to fight against them. It seems incongruous with the Aiel's code of honor to engage in violence and to kill individuals who were compelled to participate in the conflict against their own will.
Finally, last couple things here. Assuming the understanding that there was some understanding between the Aiel and the Cairhien, and as their former ability to cross the waste suggests, might it not then make sense that the termination of that understanding on the one side result in simply the termination of the understanding on the other? Cut the tree down and you can't come across our land. That seems straightforward enough to me. Cut the tree down and we'll kill you all. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Cut the tree down, we'll call you tree killers forever. That doesn't make a lot of sense. Cut the tree down, and Maidens of the Spear will see desperate, ugly, orphan Cairhienin children and say, well, they probably deserve it. That sounds pretty shitty to me. Last but not least, the Aiel themselves argue that this is not a war. They say it was not a war, therefore it cannot have been justified to have killed him as an act of war. They say it was an execution. What's an execution? A lawful murder? No, an illegal murder in this case. By the way, gardening's not an act of war, you guys. That's all we got.
Thank you, counsel. Vince, you may proceed.
While I admire counsel for his ability to use semantics to his advantage, I think that whether or not the Aiel would call what they did a war, the people of the Westlands recognized it as such, and their behavior under the laws of the Westlands made it constitute a war, regardless of the semantics of what they called it or not. I want to reiterate the fact that we are talking about a time of war versus a time of peace. If you agree that the actions that King Layman and by extension Carian took warranted a war, then you have to find not guilty on all counts, because genocide, which is frankly a little bit extreme in our opinion, genocide requires the intent to eliminate an entire race or part of a race just because of the race they're in. It does not require and every war is not a genocide. I think we can all agree with that. All they were doing was trying to come across and punish Layman for his actions. Roof Mistress, can you confirm this?
I can. And I will explain it simply for all of you wetlanders who do not understand Aiel law. Aiel law is very simple compared to your wetlander laws. There are very limited things that do warrant execution. One of them is treaty breaking. And there was a treaty between the Aiel and the Kyrianan, which had been established over 400 years before the lawful execution of lawmen. Also under Aiel law, not random culture, we submit ourselves to have justice be met out. If Layman had any honor and had simply submitted himself for justice, there would not have been a unlawful war. The only reason that Kyrian was razed to the ground was because the Aiel were searching for the coward lawmen who fled to other countries. And under Aiel law, we followed to mete out justice for breaking a treaty which the Kyrian had been fat and happy for many centuries.
So as a bit of background here, in case you're unfamiliar, I mentioned the Chora trees before. So let's explain why they're so important and why cutting them down was an act of war. The Chora trees are genetically engineered creations of the One Power that emit an aura of, ironically, peace and happiness. While common in the Age of Legends, the Avendosora in Ruidion and Avendor Eldera in Carian, before Layman committed his callous and unforgivable sin, were the last two confirmed trees of their kind. Along with the sapling, Carian and merchants were given free passage across the Aiel Waste, provided they displayed a banner showing the trefoil leaf of a Chora tree. So the Chora tree was an ongoing symbol of the relationship between Carian and the Aiel. It wasn't a gift once given and left in the dust. It was an ongoing symbol. And that being said, taking advantage of the benefits bestowed upon the Carianan, in this case becoming filthy rich trading across the Aiel Waste, constituted an implicit agreement to respect the sacred tree. The Aiel didn't lose their love for the tree just because they gave it to Layman and the Carianan. Absolutely not. Well, not Layman, but the Carianan. So I think that being said, if you agree that cutting down this tree and making it into a throne was an act of war, particularly you have to also remember that Layman was a warmonger. He was the #the worst. And so cutting down this tree not only was unforgivable and a sin against the tree itself, but the Aiel could have reasonably assumed that that was also an act of aggression, which they needed to respond to. So he needed to be punished, and they also needed to protect themselves against him and whatever he had in mind after creating this obscene throne. So we've got the three charges that have been levied. Genocide. Though the people of the Westland saw the Aiel's actions as acts of war, the Aiel were singularly focused on Layman. Had they intended to wipe out all of the Carianan, they would not have left after they succeeded at their goal of killing Laman. Just because the Aiel were willing to behave as if they were at war in order to mete out punishment on Laman for his sin does not mean they committed genocide, as I said before. That charge is frankly a little dramatic as far as we're concerned, and that's all we have to say about that. First-degree murder. Our defense is justifiable homicide in a war with a legitimate casus belli. We've discussed this. This war has a strong foundation. Therefore, the affirmative defense is not only applicable, but frankly obvious. A key element of this defense is that the killing is not done with evil or criminal intent. As far as the Aiel were concerned, this was justice, plain and simple. The evil act was in fact the intentional felling of the tree.
And in addition, the Aiel did not go around murdering people. We did take the fifth, which is very much less than you wetlanders would normally take from any country or nation you are invading. We did what is justifiable under Aiel law. We did not murder random people. We did not go from town to town murdering people. I think you're confusing the Aiel War with what the Shido did, which is a very deliberate misdirection from your wetlander leaders.
And finally, with respect to the charge of trespassing, it doesn't take a white sister to make the logical conclusion that if there's such a thing as justifiable homicide, there's also such a thing as justifiable trespassing. And I will finally remark in response to something they said before, that the Carianan shouldn't have been held responsible for the actions of their king. Frankly, why not? He's their leader. He took the action in his leadership position. He was making a throne for himself. Countries often hold other countries responsible for the actions of their leaders, and I think that was completely reasonable for them to do. Not to mention, they weren't trying to get any specific Carianan, they were trying to get Laman. Secondly, trying to draw the relationship between kings and clan chiefs. You suggested that the Aiel should have treated Laman as a clan chief, which is inappropriate because they're two different forms of government. And that'll be all for me for now.
We have now reached the stage of the case in which the parties will give closing arguments. The prosecution may proceed.
You heard a lot just now about how things were wrong that were done under Aiel law. That'd be great if we were in the Waste. We're not in the Waste, as far as I know. We're in Ohio. Opinions of Michiganders notwithstanding. You heard a lot about how the chora trees were sacred. Well, what if Laman had propagated the chora trees? What if he had a bonsai chora and my cat knocked it off the table? Would the Aiel be justified in sending 1,000 dogs to kill my cat? I don't think so. Scarcity does not guarantee sanctity. You heard a lot about the implicit treaties, the implicit state of affairs between the Aiel and the Carianan. Nothing explicit, all implicit. It should be accepted and believed. Is there any tangible evidence that this is what these things mean, or is this just what was led to be understood? The argument of the Aiel touched on how that's not as bad as other war crimes, like looting. It's still a war crime. The things they did were still bad. Just because they weren't as bad as other things doesn't make them good. Yeah. Last but not least, simply put, you don't need to send 20,000 or however many spears to kill one man. You could send an email. This war, this conflict could have been an email. The Aiel continue to persecute Carianan. The Aiel continue to label Carianan as tree killers. The Aiel continue to dehumanize Carianan as a result of this ongoing slaughter of a stabby nature, and ergo genocide and murder and trespassing that was unjustified, by the way.
Great.
Co-counsel?
I would just add to this, the selling of the Carianan into slavery, the invention of apparently the only racial slur in the entirety of the books. All of these things contribute to the mentality of the Aiel that I think lends an insight into their attitude towards the Ikarian, and that I think leads to a belief that genocide was probably their goal.
Layman sucks. Thank you.
Yes, we would like to stipulate that Layman also sucks.
And now for the defense.
As I stated in the opening argument, this is all bullshit. This is a deliberate misdirection from wetlander leadership, who did know that the IEL only wanted to mete out justice against lawmen, and deliberately misdirected and misinformed you wonderful people about what the IEL intentions was. As soon as justice was met out against lawmen, the IEL made an enormous effort to quickly and expeditiously leave the wetlands to go back to the waste. We even crossed a river in less than 12 hours to exit the wetlands, which is cold, and there's a lot of that like wet stuff. If the leaders of the wetlands had actually informed you what our intentions were, there would have not been a war. If lawman had any honor and submitted himself to justice, none of this would have happened. So all we wanted was recompense under IEL law. Co-counsel.
Sure. And with some of the legal stuff that they suggested, I would like to remind the jury or just inform you for the first time that jurisdiction is often based on where the harm is felt. The fact that the tree was cut down in Carrion means nothing when you think about how much the destruction of the tree impacted the Aiel in the waste, in the land that they were hanging out. I mean, they had figured it out by then, but it wasn't exactly nice. And at least they had the knowledge that the tree was safe and sound. Their sacred tree was safe and sound over in Carrion, until it wasn't, because Layman wanted to make a throne. They also mentioned tangible evidence. Where's the tangible evidence? Well, I would argue that acceptance of the tree itself was evidence. Their actions thereafter, taking advantage of the treaty, was evidence of their recognition of this agreement between the two countries. What did you want? Did you want Layman to send them love letters and for them to send them back?
Via email?
That's simply not how it works. I think our main point is that there was a long-standing treaty, and when countries violate treaties, it is often considered to be an act of war. The Aiel reasonably perceived it to be such. They accepted the fact that this might have constituted a threat against their country, and they acted accordingly to make sure that it never happened again, and to make sure the sinner was punished for his sin, since they knew that Carrion was not going to do the punishment themselves. Counsel?
I would also like to point out that Lawman had a history of going to war. He created multiple wars with Andor, in which he did invade several times. There is precedence there that the Aiel, on a violated treaty, were protecting themselves as well as meting out justice under the Aiel law.
Also just common sense. Like, he was the worst.
Again,
We'll give you that one. Yeah, he's the worst.
Layman was the worst.
It has been stipulated. And I just, again, whenever the charges are read, I want you to listen to the counts, listen to the defense, the affirmative defenses, and really consider whether these things were not justified, whether it was in the context of a war. Because if it was, then you have to find not guilty.
Thank you, counsel. We will now take time for some questions from the jury.
Sure, Susan, can you?
Yeah.
I hate to speak against the Aiel because I love them, but if it was Aiel law that dictated this course of action, Why did only some of the clans cross the Dragon Wall?
Not all the clans were required to. Under Aiel law, you only need 4 chiefs or 4 wise ones to determine guilt. That is part of our jury process. We did not need all the spears. And this is why I would also like to point out that we were not intending to go to war. There was no need for the mobility of the entirety of the Aiel race.
The Aiel didn't all go to war because they couldn't even agree whether or not this was a justifiable offense.
Objection, hearsay. Yes, go ahead.
You literally said that!
Yep.
I was just curious if anyone knows what became of the remains of Avendordera and how that was handled.
Yeah, that's a really great question, because if the Aiel cared so much about the remains of the tree, it stands to reason we would know that. But we don't.
Objection, relevance.
So my question is this: if Layman knew that the Aiel were coming for him individually, sending his army to stop them is really where the act of war started. Didn't he send his troops to die?
Well, again, if we are dealing with people who had no choice but to fight, that is a layman's crime. That is not the people of Kyrian. The people of Kyrian had no choice but to fight on behalf of their king.
True, but by killing Layman, by the Aiel killing Layman, didn't they save the Kyrians from his rule?
So it is worth noting that a sovereign has the right to secure his own borders. And when a massive onslaught of warriors appears on those said borders with no notice or no anything, I mean, wouldn't you send your army to stop them?
I would send an army to Partly.
Who knows? I mean, we don't know that didn't happen. We don't know.
I'm saying if he knew that they were coming for him and he sent people out to defend himself, I think the genocide was on Layman's.
Well, they didn't seem very interested in talking when they got there.
He's got somebody back there, I think. Oh, here we go.
So it seemed like a good portion of the prosecutor's argument was that the Ji'e'Trial was a gift. Why are you saying that it was an absolute gift and not a conditional gift? i.e. like a engagement ring. You do give it to the other person under the stipulation that the marriage actually takes place. The marriage does not take place, the ring is returned, the gift is returned. Yeah, that is the
Depending on the
and since you were
jurisdiction.
Arguing this is Ohio, that is Ohio law. So why is not the Ji'e'Trial a conditional gift that must be maintained properly? And when it was destroyed, the gift was destroyed and the treaty was destroyed.
Such a good question.
So if that were the case, and when the gift were destroyed, the treaty were destroyed, then we would have a return to what existed before the gift was given. We would not. I'm talking. Thank you. We would have a return to the state of affairs prior to the gift being given. We would not have retribution. If our engagement is broken, if you and I were engaged, and you broke off the engagement and threw away the ring, and I murdered you, that wouldn't be chill. That
I'm
would be
sorry.
fucked
This
up.
this is not the Avengers. There's no time travel in the Wheel of Time. We can't go back and pretend like nothing ever happened. I think we had somebody further back there.
They were desperate and starving and had no water.
But then they went to the Three-Fold Land and established themselves. Then Rhodinians built, they went to Rodinia and found out their meant, and then established the tree.
The tree was given 500 years ago.
Centuries between the giving of the water and the establishment of the tree.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. If you don't have the mic, they can't hear you virtually. So
Yeah.
I think we'll need to. Yeah, I think we'll move on to the next one.
Good
Thank
question.
you.
So, how does the prosecution feel the king would have reacted if the Aiel had cut off their side of the treaty after the cutting of the tree?
Well, that didn't happen.
I'm just asking because I wonder how justified the Aiel might be in thinking that violence would ensue therefore giving a just cause for war.
I don't think legally you can prosecute a what if on a basis of a what if. You cannot justify, oh, I did this because I thought they might. Because if we do that, then I can justify virtually any action by saying that I thought something might happen.
No, let me, in the case of self-defense, all that's required is a reasonable belief that your physical livelihood is at risk. It doesn't have to actually happen.
Right.
And as
This
mentioned
question-
before, Lawman had previously gone to war with Andor multiple times unprovoked. There was precedence that Lawman would potentially, in breaking a treaty, have potentially caused a war.
Not just potentially, very likely.
Very likely.
With respect to the Andorans in the room, Andor ain't the Aiel. All right, and Layman's not on trial. We've established that. He didn't get a trial. He was just
He's
killed.
dead.
Yes, that's right, because he was murdered. So, I mean, I would argue
And then we left.
in the event that the Kyrianan that the Aiel started killing Kyrianan who went into the waste, he'd probably be confused and upset because people were being murdered, which is then what happened. People were murdered anyway.
No.
That feels very
Layman was murdered.
a very circular argument, which I guess is appropriate given the book series. Go ahead, Josh.
You're confusing the Shido with the Aiel War.
I have a question about the Ji'e'Trial. You keep calling it a gift, and yes, it was given, but what makes it a gift and not a symbol of a treaty between two people? And once that symbol of the treaty is destroyed, then the treaty is also destroyed.
I don't know, but I want to ask Maria this question.
Yeah, actually, that's a great-
out of
yeah,
character.
yeah.
This is actually a question that I had when I was even coming up with my notes.
We agreed not to call witnesses.
She's right.
After the voting, we can ask.
All right, that's fine. To respond to your question of whether or not it was a symbol of a treaty or a gift or what have you, do you have tangible evidence as to the fact that it was known to be the symbol of a treaty?
Yes,
Does anybody?
yes, actually, the flags that the Kyrianan merchants held while they were crossing the waste were required to have a Chora
So
tree
the
on them.
tree itself, therefore, ergo, must needs be extant. What if the tree got sick?
Well, there's a mens rea element there. If he didn't kill it himself and it wasn't his fault,
That's true.
then it would be
That's a
different.
good point. I'm just going to go back to something I said before. If the treaty were void, then you don't have to murder the guy. You go back to, okay, we have a diplomatic freeze. Void of a treaty doesn't mean immediate war.
I wish that's how life was.
It sounds like the defense's argument is that the Aiel went to what the wetlands consider war because of a perceived threat against them. So is the defense's argument that preemptive war is justified in all situations?
We did not intend to go to war. We crossed over the mountains to mete out justice. Under Aiel law, there would have been no war. And as was proven, as soon as Lawman was met out justice, we left. If he had just submitted himself, as we do under the Aiel law, you go to your trial. We don't have jails.
Okay.
We don't have anything like that. You are expected to meet your honor, meet your G, and go. None of that would have happened.
I would also
We are-
to answer your question also, I believe a part of our position is that the destruction of the tree was an act of war.
Then since we are under Aiel law, are Aiel under wetland law?
This is an international law issue, and the jury is going to be deciding that.
I would just like to say there is just this inconsistency in if one council keeps saying it was not a war, we do not conceive it as war, and the other council keeps saying it was an act of war. Both things cannot be true.
Actually, one goes to intent, and the other goes to actually how it manifested in reality. The Aiel didn't see it as a war, when in fact the Westlands did.
The other thing I would like to mention, though, that Aiel law Ji'e'Trial is another thing that keeps being referenced.
We did not reference that.
Well, you
did.
did multiple. You did multiple. You said according to IEL law. You said that several times.
And then you brought up G.
Yes, you brought up G. You did. The IEL consistently say that, for example, wetlanders cannot be taken by shine because they do not follow Ji'e'Trial. You cannot apply the law, your laws, to another group of people and expect them to meet toe when they do not follow Ji'e'Trial.
I think we can apply our I'm Karianan, obviously. The IEL. While Karianan, I'm also incredibly reasonable. Okay, so I lost my train of thought. No, okay, so the way the IEL perceived the situation was always going to be informed by IEL law. The way the jury perceives the situation is going to be based on what's right and what's wrong. And that's where we're going with that.
On the point that the sapling was brought by an ambassador from the IEL to the Kyrene, and the maintenance of the tree was a symbol of the treaty, and the flag was a symbol of the maintenance of that treaty. Could the destruction of the tree be comparable, rather than the throwing away the gift, rather to the destruction of an embassy?
Did anybody live in the tree?
The tree was particularly unique, to be fair. It was a very special item, much like an embassy, much like the Statue of Liberty, you know, although it's not obviously, I don't know.
If the Statue of Liberty were destroyed, the
No.
French should come and get
I was
us?
going to say, no. That's why I didn't use that argument earlier, but same vibes.
I mean, that's what I heard.
They're about as good at protecting themselves as the Westlanders are.
It's not an embassy, it's true.
It was an act of aggression. We've got some, oh, no, yeah. We've got a couple more. We'll do you, and that'll be it.
I think an argument could also be made for both sides, the innocence of both sides, based on the needs of the pattern, because the IEL had to be in the wetlands in order for the Dragon Reborn to be born. And in order to do that, Layman had to cut down the tree. The needs of the pattern overweigh local laws.
I think that's an excellent point, and I would like to point out that Layman is not on trial here. So if you think both parties are innocent, then you should find the IEL innocent.
I'm so glad you brought that up. I'm so glad you brought that up, because if it is true that the pattern dictates that these things have happened, it is also true that the pattern dictates that Lanfear drilled the bore. And it's also true that the pattern dictates that Samael betray Luce therein at the gates of Parendisen, and therefore it must also be consistently dictated by the pattern that we find the IEL guilty now. The line must be drawn here, this far, no further.
So as the Honorable Critter, or Maureen, I should say, established earlier, that Layman is not on trial here. Right? We're blaming the IEL for genocide and all of this, trespass and whatnot. But as I stated earlier, the IEL came to deal with Layman. Layman sent his troops to war. So basically, he started the war. Also, he's the coward that ran through countries so that the IEL would.
Layman's not on trial.
I'm not. I'm getting to a point. I'm about to make a point. He's not on trial. But genocide is a pretty big word to toss around, and you're trying to pin it on the IEL when in reality, it was Layman's actions that caused all of those people to die.
If you send 20,000 people to get one person, I think that's excessive.
I call it a spectator.
It's also it's also worth noting that the defense has brought up multiple times. It is assumed that Layman might have gone to war. It is assumed that Layman might have done this thing. Therefore, we did these things. It is assumed that when I see 20,000 spears coming at me, they're not just coming to deliver a package. They are coming to kill more than just me. Unless it is explicitly been stated they are coming to kill just me, it is reasonable to follow up with that, per the defense's argument, that a war is being prosecuted, that more than I myself am under attack, and therefore that I must rally my troops to defend not only myself, but the farmers who lived by the spine of the world, the people in the city of Cairhien, etc., etc., etc.
I would also still like to clarify that you are continually confusing the Shido War with the Aiel War. The Aiel did not go across and execute people. We did take the fifth. The only time we started in the city of Cairhien, that is when we were searching for Laman, going through building by building. That's the only time that there was destruction of property at the beginning of the war, that you so call it, as we were searching for Laman. If he had shown up to for the justice that needed to be carried out against him, we would not have. According to the Aiel legal system, yes.
In his country, so you came to his country and expected him in his country, in his home,
yes,
to follow your legal proceedings.
To abide by an agreement that both countries formed together.
Just quote the arrogance.
So by that rationale, he was hiding in the top of all the topless towers of Cairhien, because y'all blew those up.
No, he left like a coward.
Yeah, so why'd you blow up the towers?
We were looking for him.
Oh, okay.
They, sorry.
Says the Cairhien.
Okay, so I think
They're the ones who brought up assumptions in the first place.
we're done with questions right now. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Duty is heavier than a mountain, and your duty is to decide whether the Aiel have committed any or all of the crimes charged. I will read each crime and its elements one by one. After each crime I read, I will ask you to render a verdict. The first charge is genocide, for which the elements are killing members of a national, ethnical, racial, or religious group with the intent to destroy in whole or in part that group. Note, the target of destruction must be the group as such and not its members as individuals. Those in the audience that believe the Aiel are guilty of genocide, please, on the count of three, say guilty. 1, 2, 3.
Guilty.
Thank you.
Those in the audience that believe the Aiel are not guilty of genocide, please, on the count of three, say not guilty. 1, 2, 3.
Thank you.
As to count 1, genocide, the impaneled jurors of Randland find the Aiel not guilty. The second charge is first-degree murder, for which the elements are intentional killing of another person by someone who has acted willfully, deliberately, or with planning.
It's okay.
I have something more to read I didn't notice. The defense has raised justifiable homicide as an affirmative defense to the first-degree murder charge. You must find the Aiel not guilty if you conclude that the Aiel were engaged in war, the war was justified or adequately provoked, the individual whose life was taken was capable of performing combat duties during war. Those in the audience that believe the Aiel are guilty of first-degree murder, please, on the count of three, say guilty. 1, 2, 3.
Guilty. Excuse you.
Those in the audience that believe the Aiel are not guilty of first-degree murder, please, on the count of three, say not guilty. 1, 2.
Objection.
I am
Too
counting.
fast.
Wait for the count. 1, 2, 3.
Not guilty.
I wish I had a little sound
You
meter.
could do a hand vote.
Let's do a hand vote. Guilty.
Anybody want to reconsider?
Did you get 28. Round 28? Yeah.
Not guilty.
It's gonna be close.
Holy shit.
I think it's not guilty. I I think it's not guilty.
It's so close.
Oh shit.
I like how she's counting silently to keep
Yeah.
the suspense.
Use a mic. Use a mic.
31.
Woo! That was stressful.
As to count 2, first-degree murder, the impaneled jurors of Randland find the IEL not guilty.
Objection.
I'm all about motivating people.
Order in the court, please. We have one more count. The third charge is trespassing, which requires the knowing entry onto the land of another. As to count 3, trespassing. Oops, we haven't done the count yet.
That's it.
Those in the audience that believe the IEL are guilty of trespassing, please, on the count of 3, say guilty. 1, 2, 3. Guilty! Those in the audience that believe the IEL are not guilty of trespassing, please, on the count of 3, say not guilty. 1, 2, 3.
Not guilty. You took that one.
I think you.
We got him on trespassing.
As to count 3, trespassing, the impaneled jurors of Randland find the IEL not guilty.
No, guilty.
It was guilty.
She said not guilty first.
I erred.
Okay, that's all. Thank you all so
Thanks,
much.
you all. This was really fun.
Yeah, this is amazing. Have an amazing rest of your day.
Looking at it, I don't.
Oh, sentence. Oh,
Can
okay.
I just bring something up this was a point I wanted to make during the
Oh
trial,
yeah, no,
but-
there was a question. I forgot.
Okay.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask, did the Kyrianan even know why they were gifted the tree? Because that actually would inform their actions. And according to Maria, probably not. They did not know why they were gifted the tree. To them, it was a mystery.
There has to be a meeting of the minds for there to be a contract.
Yeah. And
And
there was not a meeting of the minds. They just mysteriously got a tree, and then so they did not understand the significance of the gift.
I do.
Whatever. Y'all made him not guilty.
Yeah.
That would have changed
That
some
was
of
the
my
question.
arguments when I was writing them, but I wasn't sure.
Also, Maria, it sounds like people in the audience are curious what the IEL's sentence should be for trespassing.
I kind of want to know too.
That's a boon.
It would be a sixth.
Yeah, you have to go the other way around. Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Oh yeah, no pressure.
I think the IEL should have to be made Guy Shane. In not all at the same time.
That's so weird.
That's been.
I wouldn't have any idea what was going on. You just show up in white.
Actually, 5% of the IEL should be made.
Oh, okay. Very wise. Very wise.
Random Kyrianan. Random Kyrianan. That's true. You're right. Oh my gosh, that was so weird.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Panel photo before we leave. I feel like such a bitch every time I do this.
Awesome.